zidi kutembea unipandishe, ewe Bwana uninue, kwa imani nisimame, nipande milima yote, nipandishe. Atapanda, Raila atapanda. Kitu tunachohitaji ni kusimama imara nyuma yake. Wale wenye kupeleka matumba mbele tuwaache, lakini tuwaombe wapate kutubu. Hata Zakayo alikuwa juu ya mti, na Kristo alipofika pale akamwambia Zakayo, na kuona teremka, leo wokovu umefika kwako. Tunataka hata Zakayo ateremke kutoka kule, ajue kwamba nchi inakwenda mbele. Watu wa Kenya, tusishangae tukiona yanayotendeka. Tunaona yanayotendeka, iwe funzo kwetu kwamba katika mwendo huu, katika safari hii ya kwenda katika maendeleo, ya kwenda katika amani, ya kwenda katika furaha, ya kwenda katika ufanisi, si safari rahisi. Ni safari ngumu, na inahitaji watu kama Raila ambao wanasimama imara, ambao wanasimama juu ya kweli, baada ya mateso, baada ya vitisho, hata kuambiwa atapelekwa mbinguni. Hakutishika, bado anawaambia watu wa Kenya, kujeni, twende mbele, tuungane pamoja, tupige vita, tupige safari mpaka tulete ukombozi tena. Nyinyi kila mmoja wetu anao wajibu wa kusimama kuendesha neno hili, kuendesha injili hii. Na mimi binafsi nimeota, nikaona Raila nasema mimi ni viatu hii, naona nimpe mtu mwingine. Naona katika Kenya hakuna mtu bado anatosha viatu vya Raila. Katika Kenya nimeangalia, na mimi nimeambiwa mimi ni miaka 99. Kwa hivyo nimeona mengi, nimeona viongozi wengi, nimeona wengine wakija wakianguka, wengine wakipeleka tumbo mbele, wanasema nawakilisha watu, na tumbo yake ndio anawakilisha. Lazima tukatae hawa, lazima tuwakatae, tuambie safari yenu imefika mwisho. Safari tunayoanza ni safari mpya ya kuelekea katika ufanisi, katika maendeleo, katika amani, katika furaha. Mhubiri alipokuwa akihubiri katika injili kanisani, nilisikia maneno yake sana, na mimi naamini kwamba Jaramogi mahali alipo wakati huu anaangalia kutoka juu, akiangalia wana wa Kenya jinsi wanavyoteseka, jinsi wanavyotaabika, jinsi wanavyoshangaika. Anaona Jaramogi akisema, wana wa Kenya, simameni imara kama mimi nilivyosimama imara. Asema, wana wa Kenya, fueni bidii, simameni imara, vueni viatu, twende hata kama ni miba, tukanyage miba, tuelekee safari ya ukombozi. Mungu awabariki kila mmoja wetu.
Asante sana Mzee Omido. Now we want to go to the keynote address, which shall be delivered by 3 eminent persons, and I want them to come to the podium. Professor Nyang' Nyong'o, Professor Michael Chege, and Dr. Olara Otunu. As they come, there is a tribute by Ambassador Patrick Hayford, who was Ghana's High Commissioner to South Africa in the last 2 years of President Mandela's leadership, after which he became the Director for Africa in the Executive Office of United Nations Secretary General Kofi Annan. He says that Jaramogi Oginga Odinga was a true African statesman and patriot, a giant of the anti-colonial struggle, and one of the founding fathers of modern Kenya. Today we commemorate and celebrate his courageous, steadfast commitment to upholding and preserving the essence of our identity, culture, and value as Africans. Everywhere he went, he made a lasting impact. Such was the sheer force of his personality. Oginga Odinga spoke boldly and loudly for Africa, locally, regionally, and internationally, becoming a powerful advocate for the freedom and dignity of the black man. We will always remember and commemorate his immeasurable contribution and his extraordinary legacy. May his great soul rest in perfect peace. Signed, Ambassador Patrick Hayford. Ladies and gentlemen, we have now reached the stage in which we are going to have our keynote address in a unique way. And before us here, we have three great Africans. The first to speak will be Professor Anyang' Nyong'o, who for the moment is here now will remove his governor's hat and will wear his academic hat. He's not only been my mentor at the university in the Department of Political Science, but he's written a lot on politics and political economy, but he's also become a practitioner. And during the 4 days, he was the executive director of Ford and later Ford Kenya, and he was also one of the advisors of Jaramogi Odinga before he became a member of parliament and later became the senator of Kisumu and finally governor of Kisumu. Professor, I think you will start and then I will introduce Michael, or you want me to introduce all of you? Okay. The second speaker will be Professor Michael Chege. Professor Michael Chege and Professor Anyang' Nyong'o are like Siamese twins. They teach political economy, and during the heydays of the 1980s, when there used to be public lectures in the University of Nairobi's Taifa Hall, Professor Nyong'o and Professor Michael Chege were regular speakers. They've also been together when Professor Anyang' Nyong'o was the Minister for Economic Planning. Professor Michael Chege was his advisor. So you can talk of two gentlemen who are a loaded combination. Joining them is again one who combines very well with them. And Dr. Olara Otunu with Professor Nyong'o go way back to Makerere. He became the foreign minister and has been a diplomat of the Uganda government. He comes from the community of the wider Luo in Uganda. And Dr. Olara Otunu can give you the credentials of Jaramogi as a Pan-Africanist because he has a living memory of what Jaramogi was doing for the greater African nation. Now that I've introduced them, I won't come in and they have a modus operandi in which they'll keep on handing the relay baton. Professor Nyong'o, you are first on the floor.
Thank you very much, my friend Adam, Prof. Thank you very much, the family Jaramogi who arranged these things today, inspired it, and all those who have come. Less than 5 years into flag independence, the doyen of social democracy, Jaramogi Oginga Odinga, penned his autobiography, Not Yet Uhuru. Matters have since gotten worse. The masses in Kenya can hardly breathe. Across our land and nation, disrespect for human dignity reigns. There are families surviving on 1 meal per day, Healthcare for all remains a distant dream. Many parents cannot afford school fees, place their hopes on charity. Kenya is now rated one of the most unequal societies globally, with an annual rate of growth that provides little hope that our nation will provide a place to feel at home for all our people. Just before independence, Jaramogi told the Nyapara of colonial rule, and I quote, "Kenya is Marwa," which means Kenya is ours. Perhaps he spoke too early, for it didn't take long before Fanon's Wretched of the Earth foresight on the pitfalls of independence without a truly progressive and nationalist ruling class was demonstrated as from one country to the other in Africa through military coups. The new and productive African ruling class, who are only interested in the power and the benefits of power, have continued to enrich themselves and not look after the plight of the poor, which is the major cause of state failure today. One of the things that Jaramogi was committed to liberate Africans from. A generation has found itself landless and homeless even 60 years after independence. Many still live as squatters in overcrowded former Mau Mau villages and informal settlements in Kenya. Jaramogi was earnest when he wrote his book, Not Yet Uhuru, boldly stating that, and I quote, "The struggle for independence is not just about freedom from colonialism, it's also about the struggle for economic, social, and political justice for all." He was categorical that the struggle for independence, I quote, was about improving the lives of all Kenyans. As long as there are downtrodden people in the nation of Kenya, the struggle for liberation in Kenya, as elsewhere in Africa, remains urgent and an imperative. That struggle is still urgent and imperative even today. Vice President Jaramogi Oginga Odinga witnessed it all. The scramble for post-colonial or colonial assets, the rapid transfer of public property to private hands, and the rise of an authoritarian presidential state. He saw individuals and some former nationalists troop to the seat of power in pursuit of special interests. He saw firsthand the seeds of present-day major graft planted and the disdain for the citizen displayed among the ruling class. This was not the Kenya Jaramogi had dreamt of. Certainly not. Without shame or sense of guilt, this class accumulated land at an alarming speed, driving poor peasants out of their ancestral homes when it suited them. Jaramogi faced constant intrigues in the ruling party KANU to isolate all progressive forces decided to finally resign from the government to form the Kenya People's Union in 1966. Jaramogi Oginga Odinga was detained without trial, as you have heard, and the government mounted a witch hunt against all progressive forces. Jaramogi remained unbogable and continued the struggle for multi-party democracy, dignity and social justice, up to his last breath. Exactly 30 years ago today, we fondly remember Jaramogi as steadfast, modest, honest, consistent, a diligent farmer, teacher, mentor, a Pan-Africanist, nationalist, a realist who was earnest in his advocacy for the liberation of the wretched of the earth in Kenya and elsewhere in the world. Koigi wa Mwere got it right. He said Jaramogi Oginga Odinga was one of the few politicians whose politics was driven by ideology than personal whims, and by a vision that would have been a compass by which he would have led the ship of state had he been president of this country, unquote. To the disbelief of many, Jaramogi hung Kenyatta's portrait on the wall of his Kisumu home, together with portraits of great freedom fighters like Nyerere, Nkrumah, and Gabriel Abdel Nasser of Egypt. When asked why he would give Kenyatta this honor, he said, and I quote, he had no power to revise history and deny that Kenyatta fought and suffered for the freedom of Kenya. His honesty and respect for history was engraved on his walls, notwithstanding his differences with Jomo Kenyatta. Those of us who led the second liberation struggle have walked in the footsteps of Jaramogi, consistently struggle. The Constitution respects and honors, and I quote, those who heroically struggle to bring freedom and justice to our land, unquote. Jaramogi's name and footprint is in it and remains indelible. Devolution, as enshrined in the 2010 Constitution, is a fruit of the second liberation. The preamble recognizes the aspirations of all Kenyans for a government based on the essential values of human rights, equality, freedom, democracy, social justice, and the rule of law. Values that Jaramogi espoused in his life, struggled for, and suffered for. And, as I have written elsewhere, that the annals of history in the genesis and evolution of modern nations only has a few visionary leaders who shaped the destiny of such nations at critical moments in history. In the case of Kenya, Jaramogi Oginga Odinga will always stand tall among the nationalists who shaped the destiny of our nation. 30 years on, it's still a long walk to freedom, but we shall get there. Long live Jaramogi Oginga Odinga. Long live his vision and inspiration. Long live his words and advice. Note to Huru, aluta continua. I will now hand it over to my colleague and comrade, Professor Michael Chege, with whom I have worked very closely since the 1960s, not just in academy, but also in politics as well. Michael.
Thanks very much. To the Oginga Odinga family for accepting, for being generous and allowing us to come anniversary of a great African, a great statesman, Jaramogi Oginga Odinga. As Prime Minister Raila Odinga, again, always a pleasure to be with you and your family. Let me say this before I go far. I don't want to repeat what everybody has said about the greatness of this man. I want to say something about greater things we have done, which are not yet in the public domain, and which is people like us who should be doing research and bringing them to you as a way of getting him known better and also getting our country to improve the way it does its business better. I was 12 years old in 1958 when Jaramogi stood in Parliament, Legislative Council, and said whatever the British thought about the 14 members who had been elected in the Legislative Council, the true leaders of the African people are the ones you locked up. Jomo Kenyatta, the Kapenguria Six, and the others. I can assure you from my heart, from what I heard from the elders, because we are still in the village concentration camps, the earth shook. Nobody knew what was going to happen to him, whether he too was going to be locked up or what was going to happen. But I can tell you, it was a moment that raised people's hearts. Today, I want to use this position in my own small way to give back to that moment of happiness which an awful lot of young children in those villages felt as a result of Jaramogi. Not yet Uhuru has been mentioned. Recently, two major biographies this past year were published, not specifically about Jaramogi, but which mention him. I think if you can bring the two. Oh, here they are. One, it's about the life of Martin Luther King. Martin Luther King, as you all know, was one of the greatest leaders of the last century. An African American, he was there at independence in Ghana in 1957. He knew Jaramogi, he knew Tomboya, he knew this country. He followed each and every development that was going on. This is by far the most important book published so far. 680 pages, his big book on the life of Martin Luther King. You may not know that Jaramogi, and I'll say this a little later, the instruments of December 1964 as the representative of the president and the signatory of that document is Jaramogi. This appears here because it was important. Jaramogi travels to Atlanta to speak to the Student Nonviolent Coordination Conference. Jaramogi, Oginga, Odinga, Oginga, Odinga. Martin Luther King was singing about this when he was talking about Mau Mau in Harlem. So you can see what here about Not Yet Uhuru is part of the story. Second book here is the book Death and the Murder of Patrice Lumumba. Patrice Lumumba was a person whose life and whose ideas were dear to Jaramogi. He hung his picture in his bedroom. He started the Lumumba Institute. He liked Lumumba's idea. We have Lumumba estate near where he liked to live in Island. This book shows the way he was killed and thrown into an acid tank of hydrochloric acid in Katanga. Important to Jaramogi's life. You will not believe. Martin Luther King, the FBI of being a communist and of being in payroll of the communists. And that made his life hard. Patrice Lumumba was accused of being a Soviet spy. No. Rights of the people of Africa. In big ways, in different ways, in different parts of the world. The only way to make life difficult for them was to accuse them of Russia, of China. I feel this is an important for you to see where we stand. Second point, because I don't want to bore you, I'd like, if you'd like to join 1964, when he's being accused of being unlucky of the communists, and a wedge is being drawn between him and Jomo Kenyatta by the British intelligence, CIA, FBI, all those things you are reading in the papers, you see in a moment. If you can please put this video on. Of the accusations which were being made at the time, please. Oh no. Please listen, because it is important to know about how somebody's political life in those days could be destroyed from outside. Please listen.
Bulgaria. He's been Jomo Kenyatta. He's been described as anti-Western and pro-communist, and I asked him what he had to say about this.
Well, let me say that I think those who think of me like that are very wrong indeed. I only laugh at them because they are short-minded and they don't know what they're doing. Why I appear to be pro-East is because the weight has been so heavily overweighted on the western side, because Kenya has been under British. And the Americans' influence here is also very strong. And in order to be neutral, I might appear as if I'm pulling the weight in order to balance it towards the east. And anybody who's seeing me just I'm pulling in order to bring the balance, they tend to think that I go east. But I am, because I must pull towards east in order to bring about the balance. And immediately the balance comes, I can only be proud to tell you that I'm an African nationalist who will always tour what I feel is right for the African people in Kenya and in Africa.
Listen to
Odinga
that.
has also suggested, reported, that you have a private army and that you've been importing arms for this army. What's your comment on that?
Well, I wish I had it, but at the present moment I'm very sorry that I haven't got it.
Is it true that you have been sending your supporters for guerrilla training in Bulgaria and other communist countries?
Well, not my supporters. We have been sending the people who are thirsty for education from this country to go to all this country to search for education in any field, not one particular field.
Is it your ambition to become president of Kenya?
But that is not for me to judge. Let it be that is it the wish of the people. If it is the wish of the people that I should lead them in any direction, in any way, let them. It will be their own judgment and so on, and not mine.
Mr. Odinga, there's been a lot of feeling in Britain about the deportation of Mr. Beeston of the Daily Telegraph. Can you tell us the reasons for his deportation?
But that is known, and I needn't actually elaborate on it.
Okay. Ladies and gentlemen, the point I'm making is this. Nowhere in that interview did you hear any allegation on Jaramogi, in his own words, about favoring the East. It's about East and West and balancing it. And he says, I'm an African nationalist first and foremost. If you miss that about Jaramogi's life, you'll miss everything. I'm an African nationalist. There is a very strong story, which you ought to remember, about the humiliation him and his generation went through when they were young and working in this country. At one point, when he was at Maseno as a headmaster of the primary school, the Mzungu, who was his boss, tells him, you don't have the brains of my 6-year-old. You black people are sending Mr. Madhu to Legislative Council, but you don't have the brains of my 6-year-old. Jaramogi spends about 3 pages talking about that story. When he says I'm an African nationalist and I might be fighting for African people, it goes way back. The bitterness, the anger, and the humiliation. Let's not forget that before you get into the propaganda. Second point, I had and wanted you to look at this picture here. This is cow in 1952, just before the emergency broke out. I want you to look at it because it's not very clear, but Jaramogi is, well, that circle at the corner there. There's Jomo Kenyatta in the middle. Underneath here, at the bottom, is Dedan Kimathi. These photographs puts Jaramogi, Dedan Kimathi in one place, in one day. But history is not as written, giving us that connection between the two and all the others. There is Kubai at the back, there is Jesse Kariuki, there is Chief Koinange, who was arrested after this. We don't know the identities of all these people. Mzegetu Kahengeri, once we digitize this photograph so that you can see the faces more clearly, we will identify who's here. By the way, Jaramogi is in a suit and a tie. This is 1952. So it tells you how much the transitions are taking place. But there's a story in this and a whole lot of other photographs that you can get. Today, Kimathi occupies a larger-than-life place in our nationalism. No guerrilla leader fights without political backup and without the backup of peasants in society. There is a connection here you will not see in the literature so far. We can do the research and bring it to you if we do it right. The other point I wanted to make before I sit down has to do with the legacy of Jaramogi in ways we don't often recognize. I've just mentioned that it was him who delivered the instruments of Kenya's membership to the United Nations in 1964 after independence. Jaramogi also represented Kenya at the founding of the Organization of African Unity in May 1963. The documents accessing membership of Kenya to OAU, that's Jaramogi's legacy. This coat of arms, again, I would like you to look at it because when you look at the jogo and the axe, I ask students, what does it mean? And they say, well, the jogo was from Kanu, and the axe is there because it shows how strong Kanu was. This jogo and the axe is a legacy of Jaramogi. In Luo culture, when a young man leaves a Simba and is founding his home, he comes with a what? What does he provide? An axe and a cockerel. This is what you're seeing there. And this is the mind at the onset of our independence of this new house which is being built, which must have an axe and a cockerel. You know, I know, I've been taught by masters of this trade, Luo elders. If the cockerel and the axe are intact, the following morning, the omens are good. Proceed. And Honorable Prime Minister says, I've got it right, 100%. Thank you. Over there at Langata, where Prime Minister, you've done a great job with former President Uhuru Muigai Kenyatta to commemorate the scene of why we got our independence. The night before, traditional leaders from all communities went and performed the ritual of starting a new home. And Jaramogi made sure there was an axe and a cockerel. The following morning, they were intact, which means the omens are good. So don't be discouraged as Kenyans. The chicken was there, the axe was there. And the Prime Minister has built, with support of the President, this museum. Tomorrow we'll go and proceed from there. Thank you very much, Honorable. because that's a continuation of that.
Thank you very much, Mike. You people, more history will come to you as we go by in the years to come. Let me now call my friend Olara Otunu from Uganda, from Lira, Acholiland, a great nationalist in Uganda, a brilliant politician, a brilliant scholar. Thank you.
Omera Dr. Uru, Omera PM Raila, Mama Aida, Mama Margaret Kenyatta, brothers and sisters, Governor James Orengo, my old friend, and Governor Professor Peter Nyong'o, I greet all of you. I have come from Uganda with a strong delegation. There's no time to introduce them to you. We have come to pay tribute. We've come to pay tribute to Jaramogi, Oteramewa, Lawilwen, Oluma. We have come to pay tribute to him with you. In Uganda, there's great excitement. As we were trekking our way here, we kept receiving messages from people who were wishing us well on this occasion. So PM and Dr. Oburu and the entire family, thank you for organizing this. We thank you. Because of time constraint, I will be very schematic. We grew up in the powerful shadow in East Africa of the figures that you saw in the photograph that Dr. Michael Chege just showed us. Bildad Kagea, Aguin Kodek, Acheng Oneko, Pio Gama Pinto, Paul Ngei. Later on we would add J.M. Kariuki, Taita Towet. We grew up in the powerful shadow of these nationalists. I, of course, didn't know Jaramogi then. I didn't know him in Kenya. But I was very fortunate I would get to know him in New York as his resident assistant. Jaramogi in the early 80s would travel to New York because he had an NGO registered with the United Nations, and also come to New York to organize to travel to neighboring countries. And I was therefore his resident assistant in New York, and very fortunate to spend a long number of hours with him. I just want to say this. First, Jaramogi could have become a historic president of Kenya. He did not. But he became somebody more important, with an impact more durable, because he led by example, because he led and lived by his conviction. Jaramogi therefore left a powerful legacy for all of us. The second thing I want to say is that I was struck by the virtues, by the attributes that were so self-evident in Jaramogi. His faithfulness to the people, his courage, his sense of duty, his tenacity in the struggle, and very rare, his self-denial. Denying himself in order to serve the greater good of the community. Jaramogi was also, in spite of his suffering for many years, always committed to reconciliation. These are attributes which, in my view, were not accidental. The Luo elders have attributes which are expected of them as Jodito Pacho. And these attributes of Jaramogi come straight from that tradition. May God bless him for all that. Thirdly, I was struck that Jaramogi, among the African leaders, was a deeply rooted leader. Rooted in his own culture, in his tradition, in the history of his people. That is what gave Jaramogi the confidence to be so open and so cosmopolitan and to accept other cultures and tradition and not be threatened by any of that. He made friends all over. You cannot be a great leader in Africa if you are floating in thin air. You have no roots. It's like Okot Bitek's song of Laweno, without that being the authentic voice of his mother, written in the idiom and rhythm and meaning of his own people, it would not have made the impact it did. So in the political arena, Jaramogi was the equivalent. His rootedness made him a more authentic nationalist in Kenya. He made him a more powerful, convincing Pan-Africanist. How I wish that more of our leaders today would have those virtues. Then let me say this. Before Jaramogi, Bobby Marley said and sang, "We cannot sing the Lord's song in a strange land. We cannot sing the Lord's song in the land of not yet Uhuru." Jaramogi particularly provided this dirge, this soul searching, this credo cur, because of the wholesale plunder that some of our leaders are doing to our country. Not corruption. Corruption is a polite word. Wholesale plunder that is taking place. Jaramogi spoke of not yet Uhuru because he was opposed to some of the African leaders manipulating our ethnic diversity and richness to divide our people. Jaramogi never accepted this. Jaramogi said, not yet Uhuru, because he wanted power to be with our people, to elect those that should govern them, and not the string of rigged elections. And Jaramogi said, not yet Uhuru, because he believed in an egalitarian society, a society in which a child from the remotest village in Kenya can become Professor Nyang' Nyong'o. A child from the rural areas and the slum can tomorrow become Dr. Uburu. He believed with all his heart in that, in providing equality of opportunities. So, if we are today celebrating the life and contribution of Jaramogi, are we prepared to be worthy heirs of Jaramogi? Are we especially address this to the leaders and the intelligentsia? Joma wangu yabe. Are you prepared to be worthy heirs of Jaramogi's legacy? To fight the fight that he left midway. It is the unfinished business of not yet Uhuru. Are we prepared to accomplish that struggle? That is the meaning of today's gathering. And if we leave here determined to accomplish the unfinished business that Jaramogi started, then I'll say, what Jaramogi, what Kikuch, Oterawa, Yue Kikuch, La Wirwuri, We Kikuch, La Wimon, Pien, Wabichobo, what Mamegi, Wabichobo, Lueng, my child. So, Jaramogi, rest in peace. This mission will be a camp. Puyo, ero kamano.
Haya. Puyo, ero kamano. Asante. Thank you very much. Let me take this opportunity just to introduce the governors who are here and to ask Governor Abdul Swamad Sharif Nasir to say a word or two on their behalf. Apart from the First Lady, who is not a governor, my wife, you are in that category. Thank you very much. Just stand up so that they know that I'm not. Governor James Orengo of Siaya. Jim. Thank you very much, Jim. Governor Gladys Wanga of Homa Bay, the indomitable lady. Thank you very much, Gladys. Governor Ochilo Aya. Thank you very much. Governor Simba Arati from Kisii. Wapi Simba? Ako hapa. Governor Abdul Swamad Sharif Nasir, I've introduced you. You will come over. Then we have Governor Gideon Mungaro. Gideon, yuko wapi? He's not here. Then Governor Wilberforce Otichilo. Are here. Any other governor I've not mentioned? Now, I'm sure when Moses Kuria came, you didn't see him. Mheshimiwa Waziri, Head of Public Service. Kifanya nyokonyoko atamuona basi. Haya. Then my Deputy Governor, Governor Willie. Magwanga from Homa Bay. Thank you very much. And Deputy Governor Dr. Joseph Mahiri. Aya. Now I'll ask Elisha Oraro, the Deputy Speaker. Sumbu Assembly here, Nereo Kombo, Deputy Speaker, Honorable Ken Oko, please. Majority Leader. Honorable Adui Nyang, Chief Whip. Asante Adui. And finally, now finally, can I ask, let me just give a chance to Governor, because he's in a hurry, want to catch a plane. Then I'll ask Wandai. Pardon? Pardon? Okay, let me ask Wandai, just a minute. Where's Wandai? Come and introduce the MP. Sorry.
On behalf of my colleague members of National Assembly, join the family of Jaramogi. Demise. But let me also say this before I introduce my colleagues who are too young to have interacted with Jaramogi closely, have had the rare opportunity and chance to be mentored by Baba Raila Odinga. And since we have been mentored properly by Baba, by extension, we have been mentored by. Use this occasion to take stock of the gains we have been able to make, and possibly the losses we might have incurred along the way as we march forward. And let me also commit, finally, and to walk the journey. Koro yena uru, monda introduce wabunge mankind. Let me just ask you to stand up. As I mention your name, you sit down. But let me start with the national chairman of ODM, the Honorable John Mbadi, who is also nominated MP. We have in our midst, of course, the county leader or MP for Kisumu County, Ruth Odinga. The Honorable Anthony Oluoch of Mathare. The Honorable Bensouda of Homa Bay. The Honorable Adipo Kwome of Karachuonyo. The Honorable Martin, Ward Chief of Ndiwa. Eve Obara of Kabondo Kasipul. The Honorable Kajuang of Raka. The Honorable Tomo de the Honorable Sir Charles Ongondo Were of Kasipul. The Honorable the indomitable lady Honorable Zamzam of Mombasa. The Honorable Fulangege Badi Twalib of Jomvu, Mombasa. The Honorable Dr. James Nyikal. The Honorable Oku Kaunya of Teso North. The Honorable Aduma O. I have also been asked to introduce the Deputy Leader of Minority, the MP for Kisumu Central. Of course, Ron must be introduced in a special way. The Senate, who is also the Senator for Kitui. As we conclude and introduce, yes, of course, Wambua will introduce the senators, including the SG of the party. I also want to acknowledge the presence of all other guests who have come here, including the Karibu Senator Enoch Wambua. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Excellency Raila, Father Jaramogi. Be very brief. Excellency, I come all the way from Ukambani, Eastern region. Umepokea salamu to also represent the Wiper Party leader, His Excellency, today because he has been invited to the DRC. He is there with our President, President. And I know my brother Moses is here. I know for a fact that the government of William Samoei Ruto was not invited because they have messed up protocol with our region. Si tumeambiwa mzee yote alikuwa anasema ukweli. Na sisi tuseme a lot of respect for three people, three leaders in this country. The first, and that is why I am here on a Saturday. Because when he had an opportunity to form government and become president of the Republic of Kenya, he passed that opportunity and said, we can never do it for as long as Johnston, Jomo Kenyatta is in detention. The second person that I have a lot of respect for is our leader in Azimio, Raila Amolo Odinga. 2002, vile aliangalia akaona viongozi, they cannot agree on who will form the government of the Republic of Emilio Stanley Mwai Kibaki. And with those words, this man liberated us from the many, many years of dark rule of Kanu. That's the man for whom I'm here, to bring his Kalonzo Musyoka, who in the year 2013 shelved his presidential ambitions. In 2017, he shelved his ambition and stood firmly behind I want to introduce the senators of ODM, the biggest political party in this part of the region, not just in Kenya, East and Central Africa. Just come and say a word as we introduce the rest of the senators who are here. We introduce you. And I know kuna senator na sijui ameenda wapi na tuko hapa kwao nyumbani. Mmemwona mahali tembea anatafuta senator simuoni. Baba, there is one thing we have to do in a tickets Azimio. Na wametoroka chama. Political parties now must test every article of the Constitution and every section of the law. We must withdraw our sponsorship from those fresh elections. Hapa mnasema nini? Eji unasema nini? Hapo ni sawa. Asante. The rest of my colleagues, to my brother, my friend, Senator. Asante sana.
Thank you very much, Honorable Wambua. Your Excellency, for all of you. Allow me to introduce the senators in the House today. I'll start with in the Senate, Honorable Oburu Odinga. Thank you very much. From Homa Bay, na anafikanga mpaka huku yote. Your Excellency, allow me to introduce also the Senator for Migori, my brother Eddie Mwokratego. Committee and the Senator for Homa Bay, Honorable Senator Moses Kajwang. Asante sana. Down to the family of Jaramogi Oginga Odinga. It has been the honor of my life. Family to work